1, 2, 1.
Right, good afternoon and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Management Board meeting. Can I thank Claire for just arriving, because that justifies us delaying the start for a while, so thank you for timing that absolutely perfectly. There are no fire drills planned for this afternoon, so if the alarm should go off, then please leave the building through the nearest fire exit, and I think everybody here knows where that is, so I need to make no further comments there. Apologies for absence. Lucy.
Yes, I was going to say we've had apologies from Councillor Negus, who's been substituted by Councillor Hopkins.
So Councillor Hopkins was about to apologise, is that right? We'll accept your apologies for being here, Gary. And any other members who may be stuck in traffic congestion, I'm sure, hopefully on their way. Members, are there any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated, pages 7 to 9 of your papers. Are you happy that I sign those as a correct record? Yep, thank you. Chair's business, item 5, is just one item I wanted to mention in respect of the 2 call-in meetings that are coming up on Monday and Tuesday of next week. I have suggested that it is appropriate that those meetings are webcast, but because of process, it is actually easier if they are recorded and then uploaded rather than webcast direct. And I just wanted to check the members were happy with that view. It seems to me part of the public awareness and involvement in what we do. Members happy with that decision? The two call-ins, yeah. There's one call-in on Monday morning and another one on Tuesday afternoon. Pardon? No, it's only...
I haven't seen. So it's not. It doesn't apply to me. Is that what you're saying?
You're not on the list. So no. Okay, members happy with that? Okay, thank you. Item 6, public forum. There was no public forum submitted by the deadline for this meeting, but there was a statement and questions relating to the clean air proposals that were submitted to full council yesterday and were not taken, and the questioner and the proposer of the statement have asked that they can be brought to this meeting at short notice. I felt that that was part of informing us of issues that were going on and consider that appropriate. So without setting a precedent for any future meetings, I've agreed that that should be the case. And therefore, we have one statement and one question which have been emailed. And I'm just looking, Lucy, which order are we doing this in?
Yes, so do the statement first, all the questions, it's up to you.
Yep, so if we do the questions first. Christine.
So do you want me to read out the questions? Sorry, do you want me to read out the questions and the answers? The questions that were submitted, or did the councillors have this in front of them?
Councillors have had it circulated and it is on the screen in front of them.
Fantastic.
So
I need the answer.
So you need the answer. We, as I have advised you in an email, we do not have an answer.
Well, beg to differ. I understand that the first question is not answerable because I understand the second question has been answered, and that the Clean Air team have provided a behaviour change table to the Mayor's office. And I spoke to him just now, and he was happy that if you were happy to release that.
Mike.
So the procedure is the Mayor's office prepares written answers to questions at council. They've got 10 days to do that. I've had no notification that they're doing anything other than preparing a written response without a representative here from the Mayor's office to say anything otherwise. We're not in a position to provide a written answer.
I'm going to ask two supplementary questions then. So the first question is, I'm going to guess the answers, right? I'm going to double guess what you're going to say to me. So to the first question, which is about, are you actually going to release any information on the health impact of the two options so the public can be informed about their decision when they're consulted about the two options? So we've already found out that you can't release the full HAS calculation of the 300 deaths. So the 300 deaths will not be known. This is a previous session of BCC Cabinet where we did get the answers back. So we know that you cannot release the HAS calculation or cannot perform it in time for the end of the consultation, which we found absolutely gobsmacking because the 300 premature deaths was the big headline of all the newspapers. And if the public don't even know that that's going to change, it might not change because the pollution might go wider. Okay, so we think it's a very important issue that the health impact details be released from the calculation. Okay, the calculation's taken place. We believe that information's out there. It is just a simple matter of taking the NO2 levels, the particulate levels, putting it into the COMIAT formula, coming up with a percentage hazard, which then you multiply by the number of deaths to calculate the equivalent of the 300 premature deaths. Okay, now we understand that's too complicated to do before the end of the calculation. You've had plenty of time because we've asked you about this last in September. Right, that aside, we've then asked the next question yesterday, which was that are you actually going to release any information for the health impact just in the centre? Because obviously in the centre of Bristol it's more polluted. the impact of having a HAS might be better for them, even if it spreads the pollution wider. Because the people in the centre were deprived, this is an argument for polluting less in the centre and giving some of that pollution to the rich people further afield. Okay, so spreading the misery. Okay, that might happen. Maybe that's a good thing. Are you actually going to tell anything about how big that effect might be? That is something you can calculate from the model. Right. So my supplementary question, guessing that you're going to say something like, no, we're not going to tell them. My guess is because it doesn't make much difference. And the reason for that is that the 40 micrograms per metre cubes, the legal limit, is more or less quite similar to the existing level, really. In the centre, it's
Right,
just a bit
Christine,
higher.
can I interrupt? Because first of all, we have no one who can answer the questions. And secondly, I don't believe anyone here has the technical capability of annotating what you've said and relaying it to get answers.
I'll have emailed it to you. So, okay.
Fine. In which case, can I ask you to come to a conclusion?
Yes,
because
thank you.
we are unable to take this any further.
Okay, but I just want the councillors here to be aware that the main thing to tackle right now is the model. Okay? There is information that the model can be interrogated to give health impacts. The information is there. It might be complicated to do calculation, but it's there. Secondly, the model is dependent. The second question now was relating to behaviour change model. Okay, you're not going to give me the behaviour change model. I don't particularly mind because it's arbitrary. A behaviour change model is assuming what will the public do.
Can I ask you to
My
come
supplementary question?
to your supplementary
Yes,
quickly?
fine. Okay, so behaviour change model, let's just accept that that could be changed. People might even change the behaviour more than they say. They might say they'll pay to pollute, and actually when it comes to it, they might not pay to pollute. So there is flexibility there. I would challenge the model, okay? So my supplementary question was on the medium CAS D, so we're very perturbed that the medium CAS D is only projected to achieve compliance by 2027, but you just said 2033, which is different again, right? You're not comparing like with like. You're taking the medium CAS D, then there's the medium CAS C, which suddenly solves all our problems. Are the supplementary measures the same for both models? Are you comparing like with like when you go for medium CAS D and say it won't achieve compliance, and then suddenly medium CAS C might achieve compliance? Have you used the same supplementary measures? That is my second question.
Mike.
Chair, I was just going to repeat the answer, for the benefit of members who may not have been present at Cabinet, just to make the general point about health effects, which is health effects were considered as part of the initial phase of work that informed the Cabinet decision in 2018. And we said at Cabinet when we considered this last, that will be revisited again as part of preparing the final business case. So we have looked at health impacts and we'll look at them again as part of preparing the final business case. And that was the answer I gave when this came to Cabinet last. In terms of the other questions, as I've said, the Mayor's Office is preparing a written response.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you. And then, Alan?
I very much appreciate bending the rules for us to come and talk to you, and I really hope that the committee members have taken on board the principles of what we're trying to urge them to think about and be aware, as I said, that the model is not unchallengeable. Okay, that's the point.
Thank you. And then if you can pass the microphone to Alan. Thank you, Christine, for your statement. Alan.
Okay, thanks. Actually, what has appeared at the statement is not quite my statement. In the rush over the last day, it hasn't come through properly. That's actually the press release that goes with the statement that I'm about to speak to. What the statement is about is the fact that I'm speaking on behalf of the Clean Air Alliance. We're a non-partisan group of alliance of groups and individuals. We just wanted to make a statement about our views on the consultation as presented at the moment. And there's just 3 points. I'll start off, I came in just now on the end of Paula's question to the Mayor, and the Mayor talked about this is a technical process of getting there as quickly as possible, which is the legal requirement. So my understanding is that we're presented in the consultation with the choices of an option 1 and an option 2. We're about to hear this week of which one will deliver compliance earlier, and if one delivers at least a calendar year earlier than the other, then the council has to go with that option. But my first point is that on the provisional figures, the quicker one isn't going to deliver to something like 2024, which is later than most other cities, and therefore there's probably another option which gets there quicker than 2024 than either option 1 or option 2, and therefore we would support any option that is stronger than option 1 or option 2 that gets there quicker. My second point is we support a plan that restricts cars because we think that's logical. There are more cars than other vehicles, and therefore, because there are more of them, they contribute more air pollution. It's wrong to assume that cars are less polluting than larger vehicles. It's not necessarily so. It's also true that more car journeys are discretionary than a bus and lorry journeys are. So it seems logical to include cars. So we would support either the option, which is a diesel car ban, or a charging clean air zone, which includes cars. Plainly, the option that's presented to us for the charging clean air zone does not include cars. And the third point is we support a plan that keeps the large lorries out of the city centre. That is part of both options that are presented. That's the end of my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So we move on to item 7 on the agenda, Improving Public Health Clean Air Plan Update. Members, I'm of the view that this is the weightiest item on the agenda tonight, so in terms of the rest of the items, I shall be waiting time in favour of this unless anybody wishes to disagree at this point. No. Right. So, Mike, over to you to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to make some introductory remarks and then hand over to Abigail and John, who are going to take you through the presentation, although I may kind of chip in to make 1 or 2 points of emphasis. So the first thing I wanted to acknowledge, and I said this again at the recent Cabinet meeting, the consultation arrangements clearly aren't ideal. We've been squeezed between the pressure we're under to comply with a timetable we understand to be acceptable for government in terms of submitting the business case that we need to submit, and making as much information as available as soon as possible as part of the consultation process. So we're acknowledging that we're having to balance those two things, and this is not how you would ideally choose to manage the consultation. As our public speaker just mentioned, we are aiming to make further information available this week on the technical work, including further information on compliance dates. We don't have that information available for you tonight, and I wanted to make the offer, Chair, that we are happy to attend another meeting of OSM during the consultation period, if that is logistically possible, and I recognise that's not easy to arrange, but the offer's there. We expect at the latest to have that information available early next week, potentially still later this week. Having said that, in terms of the qualifications around the consultation process, I know from speaking to Abigail and John that we've had some really positive engagement actually on the consultation, not only a large number of responses, but the drop-in events have been really positive exercises, and Abigail and John can say more about that in a moment. And obviously, just to reiterate, clearly this session, although not with all of the information available yet, is an opportunity for OSM to share its views with us, and we're really keen to hear what you've got to say. But if we may, perhaps run through the presentation first, just to provide some of the background and to explain where we are in the process. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Abby Smith. I'm the project manager for this project. So I'm just going to take you through where we are, so where we've come from, the project timeline, how this fits into the wider clean air plan. That seems to be quite a bit of a confusion where the clean air zone fits in with the wider clean air plan. So I'll hope. And then how we develop the options, where we've got to today, and then onto the consultation, which John's going to cover. So the project timeline, how we've got to where we are. So this started off as a feasibility study. There was no government direction to do it. It was just something the council wanted to do because they realised there was a problem. They were monitoring clean air, or monitoring air pollution, which they had been since 2001. So in early 2017, the feasibility study was approved to provide a CAS, and Jacobs were awarded the work, and they still continue to be part of this project today. So then moving on, we received the government direction later in 2017, and that was to deliver compliance within the shortest possible time. So then moving through, it was originally in the air quality team, and it then moved to become a transport project because clearly transport was one of the biggest pollutants, and it was determined that the measures that solved that would be transport related. So then we moved into submitting a strategic outline case, which I'll go into in a bit more detail shortly. That was in March of 2018, so last year. And then, as I say, in June 18, so June last year, it was taken over as a transport project. So how does it fit into the wider clean air plan? Well, the clean air plan is largely made up of the clean air zone with some other elements around it. It includes other controls on pollution, so it's other sources, not just from traffic, including the port and the docks. And the clean air zone, as I say, it does make up the majority of the clean air plan. Options for consultation were approved in June, so this year, and the outline business case, so going forward, we're submitting in September this year. That will be followed at the end of this year by a full business case. And then that just explains our legal limits again, why we're doing all of this. So the clean air zone options. So way back when, March 18 feels like a long time ago, we developed 5 options, and this was taken and approved at Cabinet. So one of them, option 1, was a non-charging option. Option 2 was a medium class C, so that's charging everything except private cars. Option 3 was a medium size D, so that's a medium zone charging all vehicles. Option 4, a charging clean air zone, which is a small zone, so that's class C, so again, just charging everything but the car, and then a small class D. So those were the 5 options that we agreed to take forward and do further technical work on. So two of those options were deemed, following technical work, to be deemed to be taken forward. So one was a small area 24-hour diesel car ban, and one was a medium CAS D. And from the technical work that we were doing on the basis of reaching compliance in the shortest possible time, these were the projects that were being taken forward. So assessment of these options. Following assessment of these options, it was deemed that the diesel ban could not be for 24 hours due to TRO restrictions. So furthermore, we then, in addition to this, both impacted on disproportionate impact on low-income households, and also the diesel ban did show some increase in displacement, so that's traffic moving outside the zone. So for these options, so then moving on to, in light of these this work, 2 further options were then considered. So we put those to one side and then revisited all the work to try and come up with, again, something that would achieve compliance in the shortest possible time, which is always what we're aiming to do, and would also have less of an impact on low-income households. So further technical work was again taken place, and again 2 further options were then put forward. So we called these options 1 and option 2 to try and disassociate them from the previous options, because obviously it starts to get quite complicated when you're talking about options all the time. So these were then deemed to be compliant in the shortest possible time, so we were taking them forward to consultation. So the consultation, I'm just reading this. So the modelling isn't completely finished yet, so the technical work is ongoing, and I think that was mentioned earlier on as well, and that will be available this week. So before the end of the week, we'll be able to completely provide all of that technical information. So within this consultation period, it may well be possible that we would have to look at variations on these options, including hybrid options, and that's something that's been a bit of a running theme as we've been going out and talking to people in the drop-in sessions, 2 of which we've held already, and we had, as Mike was saying earlier on, we've had a really positive response of that, and we're getting some really useful comments for and against various options, but every bit of information helps us formulate a plan going forward. So as I say, it might be possible that we've put forward option 1 and option 2, but it might well be that we end up looking at a combination of those going forward. So I think that is, yes. Right. I think I've pretty much just covered all of that, to be fair. So following, as I was mentioning earlier, the OBC and the FBC submission, so following the consultation period in September, we'll be submitting the preferred option to government, and that will be following the Cabinet in September. But the consultation does include requests for feedback on all these options, including mitigation options. Mitigations is how we mitigate against the impact that this scheme will have. We know it will have an impact, but we have to do something. So we also know that there are a lot of options out there to mitigate this. Part of the drop-in session has been really useful, actually getting some of that information back from, I've spoken to plumbers, community midwives, removals companies just this week alone, and their feedback has been really useful. How can we help you? We have to do something, but how can we make it that bit easier, or what do you need? The majority of people have said that the scrappage scheme that we're proposing as part of the mitigation would be really useful, and that is actually included in option 1 and could potentially be included as mitigation for option 2. So it's things like that that's coming through, and that's why we need to go out and talk to people, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And leading on from that, over to John.
Hello, I'm John Toy. I'm Consultation and Engagement Manager. So the 2 options we're consulting on are option 1, a clean air zone. That's a CAS C, which charges non-compliant, older, more polluting vehicles, but not private cars. And I'll go into the details of that charging regime in a moment. That is within the larger boundary, the pink boundary you can see on the map. And that charging regime is supported by a number of other complementary measures. Option 2 is a diesel car ban. That would be a ban on all diesel cars within the smaller purple-edged zone around the centre of the city. So going into option 1, this is a CAS-Z zone. What non-compliant means in terms of vehicle class is Euro 5 or older diesels, or Euro 3 or older petrol vehicles, but not cars. So it's looking at taxis and LGVs that would be charged £9 a day to enter the zone, and you'd only be charged once, whether you travel many times or just the once into the zone. And HGVs, buses and coaches which are non-compliant would be charged £100 a day. Those charges are in line with what other core cities are doing as part of their clean air zones. There would be no charge for private cars. This charging regime would be supported by a number of other measures which are a mixture of things that affect behaviour change and also things that target particularly high polluting routes. So there would be a scrappage scheme which would pay up to £2,000 to scrap a diesel car, The exact criteria for eligibility would be determined following the consultation. And the targeted measures at pollution hotspots include HGV weight restrictions for vehicles over 3.5 tonnes, and those would be on, sorry, I've moved the wrong thing there. Those would be on the roads shown in the inset map. So there's the section of route that runs from Park Street down to St James Barton roundabout. That is Park Row, Upper Magdalen Street and Marlborough Street, past the hospitals. And there would be an HGV ban on that, and also a ban on diesel cars on that route. There would also be an HGV ban. In practice, it's a weight limit operating on the other roads that are shown blue there. That's Lewins Mead, Rupert Street and Baldwin Street. And the idea is those are the most polluted routes which would take longest to reach compliance, so we need to be doing more on those routes to get the levels of nitrogen dioxide down. In addition, there would be bus and local traffic interventions. So those include an inbound bus lane on the M32 between Junction 2 and Cabot Circus, an inbound bus lane on Cumberland Road, and using existing traffic signals effectively to control the amount of traffic that enters the most polluted, most congested areas in the peak periods. Option 2 then is a diesel car ban, and that affects all diesel cars within the purple area shown on the map. No, I mean all, so it would include Euro 6 as well, diesel vehicles. It wouldn't apply to taxis, private hire or emergency services. And that would apply 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. 7 days a week. The thinking being that once you affect how commuters travel in the morning, you don't then need to apply the ban during the evening peak because they haven't brought their vehicles into the centre in the morning. Yeah, sure. So if you can see the word Cabot Circus in the top part, that you're going to struggle with that. Okay. So if you can see the sweep of the map from its most northerly point, travelling down to where it intersects the floating harbour, the most northerly part of that is Marlborough Street and Park Row. So that road would be included within the diesel ban and pretty much as a boundary road. So it's a ban on diesel vehicles. It would stop diesel vehicles using that route during 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., but taxis and emergency services wouldn't be affected.
We're going to go through the presentation and then take questions.
Okay, so what I'd just like to clarify is that is 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. We haven't modelled, but we could also consider a scrappage scheme. Thank you. A scrappage scheme, the HGV weight restriction on those roads I showed you earlier, the inbound bus lane and the inbound on both the M32 and on Cumberland Road. So that suite of additional measures. And what we've done is we've asked in the consultation for what additional measures do people think would help them adapt to the two options. So in terms of our methodology, the consultation's been open now for 2.5 weeks. It ends on the 12th of August. We've sent a toolkit to MPs, councillors, more than 500 stakeholders, including public health, schools, car hire, businesses, and voluntary groups, equalities groups throughout the city. That includes draft text for press releases and draft information for social media posts. We've had good coverage in the press and in radio and TV, including Points West featuring the consultation. We've had an enormous amount of traffic on Facebook, Twitter, Nextdoor, and we're putting out messages pretty much every other day on that. And we've had about 43% of our respondents saying that they've heard about the consultation through social media. We've got bus shelter advertising that is due to go live any day now. We also publish using our usual channels, so that's the Ask Bristol e-newsletter, the Citizens Panel, the internal source, and we've held drop-in sessions, which Abby mentioned, in 6 locations within the option 1 charging zone, or in one case just outside. So that's in Barton Hill, Stapleton Road, Hotwells, St Paul's, Bedminster, and we have one coming up at City Hall. Now, those channels tend to get responses, more responses from certain parts of Bristol, both geographically and in terms of different communities. So we're supporting that with interview surveys in a number of areas where we tend to get very low response rates. Thank you. So the blue and pink dots on this map are where we've either confirmed or are still working on additional face-to-face interview surveys. And we will target both the inner areas, such as Lawrence Hill, where we get low responses and which would be directly affected by certainly option 1. But we'll also target outlying areas where we know there are people in more deprived communities who tend not to engage with our consultations, but who may well be affected because they drive vehicles into the centre to work. We will also be targeting things like builders merchants, where we know there are people who drive vehicles that will be affected by option 1, and we will try to reach those audiences that may be affected but might not otherwise engage with the process. And the other thing we're doing is we are now targeting Facebook advertising at those areas that haven't responded already, so we do it as a live process.
So I just wanted to add a comment about the results of all of the modelling work, which picks up on a comment made by our public speaker, which is for almost all of the modelling work that's been done and for almost all of the options, Bristol reaches compliance much later than any of the other cities that are being considered. And to be frank, it is a bit of a puzzle as to why that's the case. We think it's got something to do with the topography of the city and the very heavily canyonised nature of the routes that are causing particular problems, and the ones that John was featuring in terms of the proposed specific bans, because it almost seems to be the only way to actually get compliance on those roads. But I'm happy to share with you that it is actually a bit of a puzzle, and Bristol does appear to be an outlier in the technical work. Regardless of what it is you throw at Bristol, compliance seems to be reached much later than other cities, and we are a bit puzzled by it, I think it's fair to say.
Right, so we will go to questions. Can I suggest that the initial series of questions are on what we've had presented? We will then, at an appropriate time, have a discussion about how scrutiny is involved and what process we take. Now, just in terms of who's caught my eye already, I have got Gary, Brenda, Celia, Joe, Claire. Paula, I can't believe you're not asking a question. Yeah, so I will. You are? Well, everyone had their hand up, and as I haven't got a recording to show me who put their hand up first, I'm afraid you'll go with the order I've written them down. So Gary, you first, please. You don't have to speak for as long as possible. Can you keep it brief and succinct? That's not directed just at Gary, that's it, everybody. Gary.
Firstly, very briefly, we moved from 5 to 2, and then we might have variations on these. Consultation at the moment is meaningless. I'm getting all sorts of queries from residents saying what's actually planned that we can respond to. And I said, I don't know. There's various options being looked at. There's a problem that's got to be dealt with. So the consultation at the moment is a meaningless exercise. Secondly, are we looking on these areas where we're putting in bans to using AMPR technology to enforce the ban or not? Yes?
Hello. Yeah, I mean, it seems confusing. It is confusing. We're trying to, as Mike said, we're throwing everything at this, and it's proving really difficult. It is really important that people comment on the consultation, because what we want is, as I say, it could end up being a hybrid, but we need to know what people think about the measures. The measures have been in throughout. They've been in most of the options that we've been looking at. We're just kind of moving them around. And it's also the fact that as we talk to people and we get new ideas, that's when we add new measures in. It's really
I'm
important.
hearing all that, but I asked a specific question. Are we going to be using AMPR to enforce or not?
Yes.
We are. Right,
absolutely.
Good. In that case, then, is there anything to prevent us using a sliding scale? I'll give an example. We have people who have vehicles which are just beyond the level, and we have others that are massively non-compliant. We're going to be charging them exactly the same amount of money, and that, to my mind, does not seem logical. Surely we need to make the really bad polluter pay, but there's nothing in these proposals that aims to do that.
We can certainly consider that, and that's why we seek consultation. That's why we seek the public's views. If we have a lot of people saying that, then it's something we can look at. People are offering a lot of input on things that we've not necessarily directly asked, and that's where we get new ideas from. So it's all really useful.
Brenda.
Thank you, Chair. Some of our most deprived areas have the oldest cars, obviously, because they can't afford anything very new. They also tend to be the areas that are not good at responding to consultations, and I'm pleased that you're going to do some interviews because that's been successful previously. But I wonder why there are no drop-in sessions anywhere in the north of the city, because that could be a useful way of getting more information.
So we've held drop-ins in Button Hill Settlement and on Stapleton Road, which are up in the northern part of the Option 1 area. We took the decision that within the areas that are affected by the medium zone, the Option 1 zone, we would hold drop-in sessions so people could find out more, could come to us in those locations. And many of those locations are places where people do tend to come forward. Where we're targeting the interview surveys, where we'll literally catch people passing as they come out of supermarkets or out of other places that they're going for their own reasons, we target those on areas where people tend not to come to us. So it's different methods for different areas of the city. There is always a resource. We can't throw everything at every area, so we decided to focus our efforts where we thought they'd be most effective.
I understand that, absolutely, but to have no drop-in sessions at all in the north seems quite surprising. I mean, if you have any idea what the traffic's like around, say, Southmead Road around there, and I know Jeff will know about this, it's nose to tail, and all these drop-in sessions are in relatively small area. So could we not expand it a little bit? So
the drop-in sessions are in areas where we're proposing to make changes, either a charging zone or a diesel car ban, because those are the areas where the nitrogen dioxide pollutants that we have to bring down are worst. So those are the areas we're treating. Now, there are other areas that are congested, but I assume if they haven't been included in the areas, then they're not non-compliant. They are already compliant, so we haven't had to introduce the measures there. we could consider additional drop-in sessions if there are particular areas you'd like us to. I'd be welcome, either have a word with me afterwards or email me. That'd be great.
Celia.
Came to me earlier than I was thinking. I'm sure you have worked this out, but I'm just thinking about the diesel car ban and what would happen to traffic who obviously can't go through that area, and it'll develop a drive round. Does that not just push the problem and the pollution further out?
Yeah, there will be an element of that, but what we have been focusing on is the areas where it's worst. Ironically, outside the hospital is one of the worst. So we're trying to focus on those, and the absolute worst ones are in the city centre. But yeah, I mean, quite honestly, we can't avoid displacement, which is exactly as you described when cars are moved to other areas. So the areas that it will move to will be less bad than the ones we're actually focusing on. So it would take quite a while for them to get up to the same levels. We're talking really high exceedances in these sort of worst areas, so that's what we need to focus on.
Joe?
So I've got 3 questions. The answers I may have seen but forgotten about, I don't know. You talk about non-compliant buses and coaches, and I just wondered if have you got any idea what percentage of bus and coach traffic is currently non-compliant passing through those areas?
Yeah, actually, that's one of our biggest problems is how green, how clean our fleet of buses certainly already are. We don't have very far to go in terms of reaching compliance, and that's in terms of Euro 6 standard with our buses. Coaches are slightly different, but from the conversations we've had, typically what they tend to do is move their fleet around the country, which isn't ideal if you're moving the most polluting fleet elsewhere. But I think pretty soon it's sort of registering with coaches in particular that they're going to be driving from zone to zone. So if they're driving from London to Birmingham, for example, London to Bristol, Bristol to Birmingham, they're going to hit zones all over the place. So they are going to gradually have to become compliant, and that's what they are doing. But it's a bit of a problem because it gives other cities have somewhere to start from. They can start looking at their bus and taxi fleet, but ours are already so clean, so much cleaner. We've got a lot more effort to make, and that's why we had to sort of focus, and it's become such a hard job.
Okay, second question is about, it's actually a little bit similar to what Celia asked, but it's less about the pollution impact on other roads. It's more about safety, because some of the vehicles that might not be able to take those main roads where the congestion is greatest may choose to take quite dangerous diversions and narrow. There are, in Bristol there's some very narrow roads, and we feel the impact when vehicles, large vehicles, high vehicles take the wrong route, because our bridge in King's Weston was really badly damaged and is still 3.5 years later unrepaired. So it's a sort of issue around safety. That's that question, and I'll just ask the last one before you answer, and that was about bus services at weekends, because you mentioned that some of the the possible proposed ban would be a 7-day ban. Now Sundays, many people don't even have a bus service, so they don't have the option to travel into the city centre by bus. They have actually been taken away, and even Saturday services are often reduced as well. So I think that whatever you decide with regard to that has to be taken into consideration.
Abigail or John may want to add to this, but I guess in terms of the safety issue, so clearly one of the key elements of our mitigation plan will be to make sure that in terms of the distributional effects of whatever scheme we introduce, we'll do whatever we can to mitigate any potential safety concerns. But I did want to make the point that this is part of the problem of having this very narrow approach to this issue, and this is our concern about the implementation of the directive. we have to achieve compliance in the shortest possible time. The directive doesn't really give us any option to do anything other than that. But of course, we will do everything we can to mitigate those effects, just in the same way that the Mayor is attempting to find options that mitigate the impacts on lowest income households. And we will endeavour to do that. But at the end of the day, we have to adopt the approach that gets us compliance in the shortest possible time. But clearly, we'll do everything we can to mitigate adverse impacts, including on safety. In terms of not being buses not being available on a Sunday, I mean, I guess if you were being optimistic about it, the non-availability of the option of driving starts to make public transport more viable. So it's possible that some commercial services that currently aren't viable become viable, but part of our mitigation will have to be looking at what can we do to support public transport alternatives.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, but all of those points, those two last points in particular, are really interesting. And again, that's the sort of thing that we need to get the feedback on so that we can work on them. But I will just say one thing for Hartcliffe Way, when we did Metrobus, and there was sort of a lot of problems because we were making it one way, and there was a lot of concerns about the safety. I'm not actually sure where the HGVs went, but it didn't cause the problem that we thought it was going to cause. So I think naturally sometimes they do find their way around, but absolutely something we'll look into. So thank you for that.
Claire.
Sorry, completely forgot I needed a microphone. Given that the government sent this directive in July 2017 and we're now 2 years on, I'm sensing a little bit of whinging, about the being squeezed. Do you think that with hindsight, perhaps we should have put more resource into this earlier? Because it seems as though we still have a lot of unanswered questions. We've missed government deadlines. So if you were doing this again, would you put more resource in at the beginning, earlier? Because I find it quite disappointing that we're so late as a green capital, that we've been really late on this. And also my other question would be is what discussions have we had with central government about ideas and what other people have done and what works, and what help have we had, or what assistance have we looked for from central government and from other cities? Because I do feel quite disappointed as a green capital that we should be quite so late, and it's as though we had some resource but not really enough.
So I think part of the issue here is that there's a certain amount of elapsed time that is difficult to avoid, and until we got the results of the first set of options that we looked at, I wasn't involved at the time, but I think in effect we got results that weren't expected. So Cabinet made the decision about the 5 that went down to 2. As soon as the detailed modelling work became available and the impacts on low-income households was recognised, there was further work done to see if we could reach compliance in the shortest possible time, but without having those adverse impacts on low-income households. Now, until we had those results, I guess we weren't aware of the scale of that issue. I mean, it's possible to argue perhaps that should have been anticipated, and therefore a wider range of options should have been looked at the outset. That's with the benefit of hindsight. But I think that, combined with the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, Bristol does seem to have a particularly difficult to shift issue here that hasn't been replicated in other parts of the country. So whatever option we've looked at, compliance is reached later in Bristol for reasons that we think has got partly to do with topography and the built environment, but we can't be certain about that. In terms of your question about what support from government, so there is an active kind of network of authorities and sharing intelligence about what's going on and advice from JACU. And I could say that some of the queries and questions that we had from the public questioner earlier about the modelling, in a sense, we don't have much latitude there either, because JACU have to approve and validate the modelling works, which is the other area of work that we've been doing them. So we don't have freedom to actually take a different approach to the modelling work. So we are working closely with JACU on the technical specification of the work. We're increasingly talking to other authorities about the things that they're trying and doing now that authorities are getting into the later stages of looking at what they're doing. But as I say, I think there do seem to be some particularly intractable issues in Bristol that have made this a particularly hard piece of work. Whether if we'd thrown a lot more resources at an earlier stage, we would have been further ahead, I think it's possible, but it's speculation, really.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got a massive amount to add, other than I think that we've been struck by how long the modelling runs have taken as well. So, you know, we'll be putting some ideas forward, they'll go through for modelling, but then we're waiting 6-8 weeks for them to come back. And in the meantime, we're carrying on the work and working up the OBC, seeking further input on the measures to take forward. And as Mike said, we were then coming up with some answers that were not necessarily expected. But in terms of working with the government, I have a regular fortnightly catch-up telephone call with JACU, where I discuss sort of what's going on and where we are, and we look to other authorities. But I think part of the problem is that everybody's finding their way with this. Nobody's done this before. Yes, London have, but we can't really compare ourselves to London for many different reasons. And I think that we are getting a lot of support from other cities, and we're all having similar issues apart from our compliance date, which does seem to be later than everybody else's. But as I was saying before to Councillor Sargent, you know, we do have a problem in that everybody else can sort of start looking at their bus fleet as a first port of call, and we don't have that. So because ours is already largely compliant. So I think there's a lot of in this. It does sound quite complicated because it is, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, I mean, thank you for that. I would say that our topography is actually quite well known. That's not a surprise. Okay, we're the biggest city in the country for glue ear and things like that, because we have a weird environment that we live in. So that should not have come as any surprise to anybody. And I sort of get the impression that actually perhaps we should have thrown more at this to start with, because these, you know, I think for me it's staringly obvious that we knew we had a lot of low-income families, so that was not a surprise either. And these delays have actually seemed to me to have been avoidable. But thank you for your explanation.
Paula.
Hi, thank you. I've got a few questions. One of the things you talked about resource, I mean, £1.6 million has been given towards it, so and nearly £1 billion of that's been spent, so there has been resource used. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. So I've got a couple of questions. One is about the scrappage scheme, because when I read the report, at times it says would have a scrappage scheme, could have a, and then would or will. So I'm unsure as to whether the scrappage scheme is legal, or has it been all agreed, and is it definite, and are we getting the money for it? Can we offer it?
Every measure that we're putting forward, all of the elements of the project are subject to a bid. We have to put a bid into government to do that. That's why we're working with JACU continuously. So that scrappage scheme for option 1 would form part of that bid. What we're asking for option 2 is, do people think that it would be a legitimate mitigation measure, in which case we can add it in again as a mitigation measure. So
are there any sort of odds on the chances of getting those bids? I mean, how confident are we that we could get a scrappage deal?
Others has been given the scrappage deal. maybe they won't have got as much funding as they've put in. So if we bid for, say, like Leeds bid for 40 million and got 27, 29. So, you know, we would, whatever we put in, we're not necessarily guaranteed to get all of, but we want to make the scrappage scheme a part of it. And that seems to have been some really positive feedback during our drop-in sessions as well.
Okay. The other question I wanted to ask was about the diesel, the diesel option, the banning diesels option. Is that legal now? I mean, I know it's a bold and new option. Does it need any legislative changes or anything, or is it?
It would be a TRO, and the reason that we couldn't do a 24-hour ban is because you can't legally ban under a TRO for more than 8 hours in one slot, 8 hours within any 24 hours. So that's why we've gone 7 till 3.
There are no legal objections to that otherwise. So the 8 hours is absolutely guaranteed.
Yeah, we would need to do a TRO, so it would need to be statutory consultation, as in with any TRO.
I know, but it's within our remit to offer that.
Absolutely.
So we're not, okay, that's fine. And then I wanted to ask a question about the consultation. Well, I suppose I wanted to say something first, if you don't mind. I've just had a really interesting briefing this week about the consultation that's coming up on the Western Harbour. And there was an opportunity. I was invited to it, and I thought it was because of my scrutiny role, but actually it was because I was a neighbouring councillor. But there was an opportunity to look at the options, and we felt that actually it had been refined down to, that it had lacked breadth, because again, we were giving 3 options, which, one of them might not be a runner, so it felt like it might be only 2 options. And that resonates with me here this evening, that again, you're giving 2 options, and maybe it is too limited. I'm very interested in what you're hearing about hybrid options coming back, and so that's really positive. But the question is about the compliance. Well, compliance, and I want to ask this question twice, because not having the technical details about the year when we would become compliant for for either option, how frustrating, or how, sorry, that's a very loaded question, I don't mean to do it that way. What have the responses been that you've got? I mean, are people frustrated, annoyed with it? Is it causing concern? And I've got another part of that question about the consultation, if you want me to go ahead with it. So the other thing is about compliance on consultation. So if you have a 6-week consultation period, but actually 3 weeks of that consultation period are inadequate because a really important piece of information like the technical details is not there, is that compliant in the way of consultation? Are there any legal obligations? Are we in any way open to any sort of complaint by citizens who would feel that that hasn't been properly done?
Let me take that second point first. The timescale for consulting is the timescale that's driven by the dates we have to get the outline business case in. So we had to start the consultation when we did on the 1st of July. And our legal duty is we cannot consult on material that isn't known. So we consult on our best knowledge at the time when we start the consultation, and we were explicit that we would be adding in the additional information on compliance dates. That's written in the document, and so anybody reading that will know, oh, hang on, if I need to know about compliance to give my informed consent, I can wait to respond until that information is available.
So you think that will be adequate?
Yes, I think that'll be adequate.
And do you have any way of monitoring responses that have been done before I thought it was going to be the 15th of July, but if it's next the 21st or something, will you have any way of, you will be able to monitor the responses that come in before that date and then afterwards?
Yes, we know the date and time when responses are submitted, so we could check to see whether there's any difference. Having said in what people feel with and without compliance dates, but having said that, we don't get an even spread of consultation responses throughout a 6-week period. We always get a pulse at the beginning, and we get a big rush of 30 or 40% at the end. So that won't be the only factor. The availability of compliance dates or not won't be the only factor that affects when people respond. There might be something else that actually is a bigger control on whether their views are supportive of one option or another, or any other issues they have. So while it is technically possible to cross-tabulate the response date and what people think, I'm not sure it would be a useful process.
Okay, so but you feel that we're comfortably covered from a legal point of view about doing the proper consultation?
Yeah.
So, for example, I mean, could somebody put in a judicial review further down the line if they decided that they hadn't been properly consulted and they weren't aware, and then somehow they suffered some loss?
So if I address the first question first, which is, there's no legal timescale within which you have to consult. What you have to do is give people sufficient time to be able to formulate a response. So that they've got to have enough time to be able to understand, enough time and information to understand what is being asked, and to make a response. So that's what that's the reasonable, the reasonableness of what we have to do. And so we felt that 6 weeks was a reasonable time to do that, and also by notifying people that this was going to come slightly later, that would be, they would have that. That knowledge and information, be able to then know that information was coming a little bit later, as John had said, and be able to respond within that time that we've given. In terms of challenge, well, we can never stop people challenging us. It's whether we can say that we've done all we can to put in place a reasonable process, a fair and reasonable process. And so if anybody chose to challenge us, then that's the response that we would make.
I mean, I don't think that's, with all honesty, Nancy, I think that's actually slightly alarmed me in a way, because the whole thing about a reasonable test, is it reasonable for such an important consultation to be, I know you're saying that it's 6 weeks, but actually it's now going to end up being about 3 weeks. And I understand that Could it be extended or something?
So I just wanted to say, I did actually, say this at the Cabinet in June, that we recognise that, and I said it again tonight, this isn't ideal, but we are having to balance two different risks. There's the risk about potentially being challenged about not making enough progress on getting on, and that's in a sense the pressure that's coming from government and other third parties. So in a sense, you can't view one risk in isolation with the other risk. So our judgment was based on this is in light of those two competing pressures about getting on with doing the work and giving people enough time to comment on the information necessary to make an informed view. This seemed like us to be, the best balance we could get between those two things. But it isn't riskless, and we acknowledged that when we were at Cabinet, and Cabinet made the decision to proceed.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that at the other end of the consultation, you have to get your outline business case to September, or they might take all that nice money back from us.
Exactly. Everything is driven by shortest possible time, and that's what is echoing in our heads all the time. We're trying to resolve the problem, but we have to do it within the shortest possible time. And I was just going to pick up something you were asking about, are people concerned about not having the compliance dates? So far, we've had two quite long drop-in sessions that have been running sort of through mid-afternoon and then through the evening. And so far, no, people generally, and we've had nearly 2,000 responses to the consultation as well. People tend to be more concerned about, or more inquiring about, when it will be implemented, so when it will affect them, rather than actually when we'll reach compliance. So it doesn't seem to be a factor that's governing how and when they complete the questionnaire. So this has been interesting.
It makes me think about if I was going to buy
Paula,
a pair of shoes.
Paula, you've had more than everybody else has had in terms of questioning, and it's my turn. So I just wanted to pick up on a few points. One that was raised was the question of the impact on cars of different levels of pollution, because it does seem to me there is something very inequitable in a process that penalises all diesel car users and does not recognise what level they have. In other words, someone who's possibly spent a lot of money on buying the cleanest and least polluting diesel car available is being penalised as much as someone who has something that has been around for many years, and that seems to me to be wrong. I feel uncomfortable with that. I'm interested in terms of the scrappage scheme, of what the cost is of the scrappage scheme. I mean, we pay someone £2,000 to scrap their car, but presumably we then have to scrap the car, and there are costs and processes in that. I have concerns about the consultation. In sharing Brenda's comments, I understand that we appear to be saying we need to consult with the people in the areas where the air quality is worst. Clearly we need to consult with those people. But actually, we also need to consult with the people who are driving through those areas from all over the city. Now, I have a vested interest. My ward, as you know, John, has a reasonable record of responding to surveys. Admittedly, the A4018 survey there was an element of vested interest between Westbury-on-Trim, Hembury, and a lot of people from Southmead, even though they weren't even asked for an opinion. 3,200 people wrote in. I actually think the figure was more than that, but anyway, that was the figure that was recorded. Now, we're looking here at not really bothering with Westbury-on-Trim or Hembury in terms of asking for information. And I'm using that because it's an area I know, but I'm thinking of other areas as well. Should we not be consulting with the residents who are actually helping to cause the pollution, because we need to include them in engagement at this stage of the process? And very simply, you have 2,800 email addresses from all those who responded to that survey. Have we emailed them and asked them with a hyperlink to respond to this consultation?
So we can't email people who have responded to a previous consultation unless we've actually asked them and got them to give permission for us to do so. On this consultation, you'll notice we've got a question at the end: would you like to be kept informed about future consultations on clean air or transport or the environment? So we will have a GDPR compliant list going forward, but we didn't have one from the respondents to the A4018. We are consulting with, we're reaching out to communities across the city with a particular effort to reach those communities that don't come forward in large numbers through the other methods that we've used for years and years and that we know works well. As you say, Westbury-on-Trim and Henleys have an amazing record at responding in large numbers, and we are confident that they are doing so at the moment through our normal channels. We need to focus our finite efforts on those communities that don't come forward in large numbers without some additional effort.
In the context, I was looking at the figures, so the figures for my ward is extraordinarily low. And what I'm talking about is that when we're pursuing any policy, the need to engage with residents actually gives some legitimacy to the final policy that's introduced because we've consulted. So I am just concerned that showing a number of between 37 and 58 per 10,000 residents for a ward that usually achieves a significantly higher response is an indication that actually the awareness does not appear to be as high as I would have expected it to be.
I think there are a number of things that affect how much people respond. The highest response rate is from Hotwells and Harbourside, who would be directly affected by the diesel car ban, the option 2. We haven't held any drop-ins, we haven't held any face-to-face in those areas. They've had exactly the same level of intervention as Westbury-on-Trim and Henleys so far. We do have a drop-in planned for that area. And but that hasn't taken effect in the figures that you've seen so far.
So can I just ask, when you talked about press, has that press gone to the local free newspapers and magazines as well as the main local? It has,
media? And we find that hyper-local media is very effective in reaching communities. And we would welcome work by all councillors in promoting the consultation, whether you personally approve of the views or think your constituents will. We would like their views both for and against, and any issues that they can flag. And I would be really pleased if you could promote this as widely as possible amongst your constituents.
Gary.
Great long email list of local residents who are interested, and they give us permission to give them information on council stuff and other stuff, and they do respond. I can tell you that in some cases, putting in a link will produce hundreds of responses to consultations. But at the moment, there's nothing to give them that's meaningful. We're told that there's going to be hybrid versions available. Great. When we've got those, we can put them out to people to give them a menu of things that they might comment on. At the moment, we've got 2 inadequate proposals, and we're told, well, we might have to amend them. I mean, how can we get meaningful responses if we don't have meaningful information to give people? We also need to know what they're going to be fined, what vehicles are going to be affected, because I'm not surprised you're getting lots of queries, how am I going to be affected by this? Because they just don't know from the information that's actually going out. So can we get, after this meeting or consultation with us, some meaningful information that we can all pass out to our residents, and I'm sure other councillors would want to do as well, which answers some of the questions, and then you'll get some meaningful answers. Because my experience is people are generally in favour of things being done. They want it to be done, but they need to know some detail, which they're not getting at the moment.
Chair, I just wanted to clarify, there won't necessarily be hybrid options. We've flagged up the fact that that's a possibility depending on the further technical work when it's available. We are consulting on 2 options which are the preferred options at this stage. And all I can say is that the evidence of the consultation response to date is that there are plenty of people out there who do feel that there's sufficient information to make a response. Clearly, there will be other people who you've spoken to who don't feel that, but the evidence of the response to date suggests that plenty of people are finding enough to make a comment on. But we've recognised, and I'll continue to acknowledge it, the consultation is not ideal. We would have preferred to have done it differently, but plenty of people do seem to think there is enough to make a meaningful response. We've had, I think, over 2,000 already, and the feedback from the drop-ins we've held so far has been very engaging, actually.
Can I just add to that a further call adding to what John just said? If you know of any groups that you think we may not be engaging with that are in your wards, we would urge you to let us know, because we have reached out as far as we can get. We're aware of a lot of groups, but you might be aware of one that we're not, so we would really urge you to let us know of any that we might not know. Thank you.
Right, can I ask members now? I think we could carry on with this discussion for the rest of the evening, but I think we now need to direct ourselves to how we engage in this process. Now, Mike has indicated that we could have a further meeting to discuss the additional information when it becomes available. And in addition, I see that Abby's got an interesting challenge between the 12th of August and dispatch date for Cabinet to produce a report and recommendation. But we also need to consider whether we feel it appropriate for us to review the recommendation that goes to Cabinet. Now, we haven't got time for a lengthy debate on that, but I would like members' views on whether we should do one or the other of those, or both of those, or none of those. Yeah, Jeff. Microphone. Use your mic. Sorry, we can hear you, but the webcast can't.
I was saying I think we should do. I think it's going to be a very emotive subject. But the only thing I do ask is perhaps we do it with a reduced agenda, because it's going to be quite a long topical discussion. And if you look at our agenda this evening, we could be here till 3 o'clock in the morning if you're not careful.
If we choose to meet to have the further information presented to us, my immediate suggestion, given that Mike mentioned this to me about 2 minutes before the meeting started, is that possibly we could adjourn this meeting, find a date that is as convenient as possible for as many of us as possible, and that would be the only item that we'd be looking at. But we would have to give a chance for public forum, because there are a lot of people who have an interest in this as well. So that was my thought process of how we could work that. If we were trying to look at anything before the cabinet meeting, we'd actually only have the option of meeting on the afternoon of the 2nd of September, which would be the day before the cabinet meeting, and would give us 4 days notice of the papers being produced. And that, again, would probably be the only item on that agenda. So that's why we need to work out exactly how we want to move things. Who else has a thought? Anybody else? Claire?
Are we really looking at that close to a cabinet meeting? Is there absolutely no other date?
Well,
I just feel that we often
I'm
have
not convinced
big-ticket
how
items.
Abby and the team are going to produce a report that quickly anyway. So actually, we wouldn't have a report to see. We will only get it. It will only be produced on the day of dispatch for cabinet, which would be the Friday before the August bank holiday.
Okay. It just seems that we're always having big ticket items where we've got to discuss things and come to conclusions really, really quickly.
So we can have it any time, unless Mike, and my understanding is we could have it any time after the dispatch date, which is the bank holiday, the Friday of the bank holiday, but we would not have the information available until probably very late on that Friday evening. So we can do it the following week. I'm just checking with Lucy that this is achievable.
Yes, we can do whatever you need us to do. That's fine.
No, it is fine. I think it's more important that we have absolutely all the information. But I was just
That was
expressing a concern.
My feeling was that it gives us more time to absorb the report.
That's fair enough.
And for members of the public to put in comments. So that was why I was thinking that. But we have to look at the civic diary and officer availability and a whole host of other things.
Okay,
Celia.
fair enough.
So can I just clarify that what we would have to look at is the preliminary outcomes of the consultation plus the technical data? So what we would have to look at the next meeting would be perhaps the preliminary, can't say it this time of night, consultation data, broad brushstrokes, plus the additional technical data. So
yeah, and it would
there's
be
a lot, I think.
Yeah.
I kind of disagree with you. I think there's actually a lot in this report, which is for me quite technical, which I'm thinking, I think I understand that. I'm not quite sure. I had to look up what an LGV was, for example. You know, things like that. But if we had that, what we've got to do when we meet for this next time is make sure we've got everything that we need, as much as.
Absolutely. And what would go to Cabinet would be the result of the technical work, but not only that, result of the consultation itself. So we would be putting forward the preferred option, the recommendation. Absolutely.
Gary.
I'd like to know, firstly, before we look at other meetings, if anything that's been said tonight has been taken on board, whether anything might happen. So, for example, I think we both were saying that the blanket figures with no consideration of pollution levels, etc., seems very unequal treatment. And basically, there are ways of actually doing that if using AMPR. So, could that be taken on board, and can that be fed out to the public as an option? Because most people probably never even thought that that's possible, because they don't know how you're going to enforce. So, how would they know to put that forward as an option?
So, I mean, I think, Abigail, to some extent, it's a technical question and an enforcement issue.
I think it would be an issue with enforcement, to be honest. It's something we can absolutely look at. We can look at all the suggestions that are coming forward. And, you know, what we can consider and what we are considering is sunset periods, so that you can gradually, you know, you can give people time to change their mode or change their car, you know. So I don't see why we couldn't also consider that. And, you know, we could consider that, you know, perhaps the people with the least, sort of the nearest compliance, so the least polluting vehicles could potentially, you know, come in a bit later. But you're right, what we'd need to do is target the most polluting, so it's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of this. A business that I was dealing with in my local area, they've got a fleet of pretty new vehicles, but just possibly outside, but they're not the sort that are creating the major problem. They're on leases. They've got they'll take time to actually adjust those leases. They can't just rip them up. So the blunt methods that we're actually using here aren't going to produce the results that we want and aren't going to be fair to people who are trying to comply.
So I'm looking from guidance from members, because I'm not against us having 2 further meetings, but I'm not looking to inflict it on us if members don't have a wish to do so. Sorry? Yeah, and Lucy's just prompted me. We've also got to try and fit in a meeting about the council-owned companies as well, sometime in the next 6 weeks. So it is a question of what members want to do. I think we need to keep this in perspective. I think this is one of the most important issues coming to the council this year, and we mustn't. And we mustn't.
I was going to suggest we had a sleepover actually, and just powered through the night possibly, and just did it all in a weekend or something. But I was being a bit mad.
So, we could just combine the 2 into one meeting at the beginning of September, because in one sense, the provision of the technical information, there's going to be very little we can do in receipt of that information before the end of the consultation. So one possibility would be to combine the 2 in a meeting on the 2nd of September. The other option would be to have the earlier meeting and decide that what goes to Cabinet anyway, and we can have our say as individuals. Claire?
Yeah, I'm up for that. Is there could we have the technical information as soon as it comes available? Because then that gives us time to read it, assimilate it, read it again, understand it before we all go to this meeting. It would be nice to just have that information as soon as possible.
Yes, Chair. So just to confirm that, as soon as the information is available and we've had a chance to validate it, it'll be made available as part of the consultation exercise, and we'd make it available to members as soon as we can. And clearly the team would be happy to answer any queries. We wouldn't have to have a meeting to answer any specific queries that you had, so we'd do that. Can I just, I'm looking at Lucy, I think I just need to flag up, Chairman, that it might be better not to be specific about the date in September, because we actually are in consultation with the Mayor's Office about the date of the September Cabinet, in order to ensure that we can do the analysis that we need to do to inform the Cabinet report. So I was just checking with Lucy whether that process had concluded, and it hasn't, but it might actually help you because it's potentially the case that it might be a slightly different date for the cabinet meeting.
Might help Abby a bit
yeah.
as well. Right?
So can we just, rather than you fix a date and then find that potentially cabinet has moved, I just wanted to highlight that issue now, Chair.
I'm certainly happy with that level of flexibility. Do we go with one meeting in September before cabinet and after dispatch? Okay, right. And that, no, because we don't know when the cabinet meeting is going to be yet.
So can I just ask a question? So would we be able to, would the paper change or the report to cabinet change as a consequence of us having met and our comments, or would it be too late to make any amendments?
It would be too late because it would already be published, but we would be able to put a statement into cabinet of any views made by
collectively
by Scrutiny, which would not be published with the cabinet papers because they'd already be in the public domain, which would be submitted to the cabinet meeting when it meets.
Okay. I mean, there is an argument to say that as individuals we could do that and attend cabinet. So, yeah. I mean, I'm inclined to think, you know, we're going to be sitting there for an hour or two discussing something that we could all individually do, and then if it's not going to make any difference to cabinet, I wonder about the benefit of it. That's if it's not going to, you know, we're not going to scrutinise it and say, actually, could you just change this a little bit? And that's not going to happen. So then we all, if the papers have been published, we could all read them and put statements in and questions and turn up to cabinet. Although I suppose I can see the argument of having a collective view on it.
Just to clarify in process terms, although we couldn't change the cabinet report because it had been published, if Scrutiny was to make a recommendation, clearly cabinet could consider that in the decision they made at the meeting. That's the process.
Okay, so are we happy that we go with that basis? Well, no, it will be. That will be what we've agreed. It will be the paper that goes to cabinet because we will meet after dispatch of that paper. Okay, right. Abby, John, thank you for your time. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is preparedness for EU exit. And Tim has sat there patiently and with enormous excitement waiting for this item. But I think, Tim, you won't be hopefully overly offended if I suggest that members are happy to take this report as submitted on the grounds that it is about the 5th time we've been updated. Yeah. Tim, I hope you're not too devastated. So we move on to item 9, which is the One City Thematic Boards. And it's always a pleasure to welcome back Andrea. And I know of anybody in this organisation, Andrea knows most about the reasons for being delayed at OSN meetings and having to sit through what goes before. But welcome. Can I also welcome Ed Rowbury in his capacity of the One City Plan? And I should declare a totally irrelevant interest in that I am a director of Bristol and Bath Regional Capital, of which Ed is the chief executive, and I would rather declare that to members than have members discovering something later and suspecting something that would be totally inappropriate to suggest, but therefore I want to just be open about that. So in terms of One City Thematic Boards, Tim, are you introducing or are we going straight to Andrea?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having me. Obviously, I just want to point out that I hold 2 roles in the Council, so my piece here says I'm the head of the Delivery Support Unit, which I am part of the time, but I'm also a co-head of the City Office with Ed Rowbury, which is why I'm here to talk to you about the thematic boards. I am conscious that this was discussed quite in depth with the Mayor earlier at Mayor's Question Time. So what I thought I would do, and you obviously have the report, I thought I'd just do a very, very quick summary and also kind of the latest information, because there's been, for example, the Environment Board met for the first time last week. So I'll just sort of do a quick summary of there and then over to questions. So we obviously have under the One City Plan, under the City Office, there are 6 boards that are associated with the leadership of the One City Office and the City Plan. 3 of those boards have been in existence for a number of years. That's the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Homes Board and the Learning City Partnership. And we have not changed any of their terms of reference. They continue to operate as they have done previously, and all of their information we do have a link to from the One City website, but all of their information, minutes, terms of reference, etc. exist on the Council's website, and that will continue. What we do have is 3 other boards, one of which is the Transport Board, which was an evolution of the Mayor's Congestion Task Group, and that met for the first time in January, so predated the launch of the One City work. But there have been 2 boards that we're in the process of setting up or have set up under One City, one of which is the Environment Board. That met for the first time on the 10th of July. I will advise that we have a terms of reference for that. They are just tweaking that because obviously they had their inaugural meeting, they've made some slight changes, and as soon as we have that, we'll be publishing that on the One City website, as well as their minutes, which will come through the One City website. The Economy Board is in the process of being established, so as soon as that is established, we will share the membership, the terms of reference of that meeting, and also as well, they have indicated, obviously, they have indicated that they would be willing to make available their minutes, but they haven't yet been met, constituted, or formed, so I have to be quite careful that we'll be supporting that, but obviously that will be a decision for that board. But certainly our early indication is that they would definitely want to follow that kind of route. So we will have that available for you. I will point out as well for the members that weren't here for Mayor's Question Time earlier, the Mayor has requested as well that myself and Ed Rowbury have a discussion with each of the chairs about the ability to have observers at those meetings and those to be councillor observers. Obviously, we will need to have that conversation with each of those chairs, but that was a request that came out from earlier in the meeting today. The one thing I will flag that isn't also in the report as well is that we are due to come to Scrutiny in October as part of your existing work programme to talk about the work of the City Office, where we are. And we would also request if we could possibly come back in January, because in January we will be launching the 2nd version of the One City Plan. There is a new version that is issued every January. We will also be issuing an annual report, because it will be our first year. That will have been a full year that we will have done under this sort of interpretation of the City Office, and within that we'll obviously be setting out what we've achieved to date, what's happened with the top priorities, the plan, the engagement, and also pieces on the board. So we would be quite keen to bring that to Scrutiny in January if Scrutiny were interested in receiving that. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop kind of summary. I thought I would then move on to questions, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you, Andrew.
No, that's really helpful, and I'm glad you were both present for the discussion with the Mayor as well, because I think that helped and was a very positive discussion. But I think, you know, if I make a point from my own point of view, I know you and Ed well enough to talk to on any issue that comes up. I don't know the chairs of the boards as individuals. I don't know most of the members of the boards as individuals. So that was the bit that I was trying to convey about how councillors are included in the One City developments, rather than for, I think, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but some have had the feeling that they're not welcome in the process. And how do we make that engagement to actually make members feel they belong and actually recognise, as I've discussed with you many times in the past, about 70 members, all with all sorts of skills and knowledge that they can bring to help a process. So that was the point that I felt was really important. And what this does is just give us and re-establish the background, which is also very helpful to the work you're going to bring to us later on in the year. So thank you for that. Questions from members? Joe?
Sorry, webcast. Yeah, the first thing, just can you clarify, sorry Andrew, can you clarify when you say an annual report, are you talking about an annual report on the city plan, or are you talking about annual report from the city office? 'Cause
So our intention is it would be an annual report from the city office that talks about the activity we have done since obviously the plan was launched on January the 11th. That set a set of priorities. We obviously agreed funding as well. So what has that city office done over the course of the year to demonstrate why are we here, the value that we add, etc. And then there will be a separate launch of the second version of the One City plan. Within that plan, I would expect, obviously within the narrative, there would be commentary on what we've done, but we do view them as very linked but slightly separate pieces of work, if that answers your question.
Can I ask my other question? I mean, you've sort of kind of covered a bit of it, but obviously there's been a bit of concern about how we get information about what's happening in these with these different boards, as we're not involved, and there's that sense of legitimacy and democratic accountability that I think it's probably not all that fair, but it's how it's sometimes coming across. So I think it is really important that you emphasise that it's a two-way street, and that whilst we may not sit on those boards, we should be able to have some engagement with them. So I'm pleased to hear about the, you called it, what did you call it? The board city One City website. So that presumably is the main place where we can submit stuff, and we can also hear about what's going on. But I would also say that I think it's really important that every thematic board is providing regular information and updates. I don't think that it's just okay to say that the chair can decide how that's done. It absolutely has to be done, because we're the people that were elected, you know, and it's really important that elected representatives have, you know, the right amount of being kept informed. And then the other thing is with the city gatherings, I really think we need to be invited to those. I know they get very full, but if we're not in there, we're not in the room, and we don't know what's going on.
Celia.
This isn't really a question, this is just a comment, and I'm really pleased to see it. I noticed on the Bristol Homes Board we've got some evidence of Thrive in action, because one of the members, Tom, is part of the Independent Mental Health Network, and that's really looking at how housing can meet the needs of people with mental health problems. That's really good, and I hope that that's probably replicated in some of the other boards. I don't know all the people who attend, but it's about putting everything together as part of the One City plan to make sure that they are all linked, because that's how we operate. So I'm pleased to see sort of Thrive in action there.
Claire?
Can I ask, I mean, I wasn't here at Mayor's questions, so I don't know whether some things have already been answered. For health and wellbeing and for the Homes Board, those agendas and minutes are published on the Bristol City website, council website. So will all of these boards publish agendas and minutes, and will they all go on the council website?
So they're not all council boards, so they won't all go on the council website, but we have committed to putting them on the One City website, which is available. And what we're doing is rather than duplicating, we're linking to the health and wellbeing page on the city website, rather than kind of having a duplication, because obviously they're not all city council boards. We do have a page on the city council's website about that, which we are looking to kind of do the linking across.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say, and I think that's really disappointing, because I think for me it feels very much as though these boards have now are dealing with some of the most important issues the city faces, without elected members being either in the room or having easy access to what's going on. And I find that quite disturbing. I want to note that. I feel
if I can just interject there, that the discussions that took place at Mayor's Question Time were that, with the exception of health and well-being, the others would only be making recommendations. And those recommendations, where they're key decisions, will go to Cabinet. Health and well-being is, and Brenda can correct me more than I know myself, but is a decision-making body in its own right.
Well, it's a statutory board.
And always has been. And therefore, checking on the governance of that, because we have responsibilities for ensuring that it's delivering what it has to deliver, is important. But it is separately constituted and always has been a joint venture, if you like, rather than a sole responsibility.
So just, sorry to be a bit thick, does that mean that their recommendations will go straight to Cabinet, which means that they will come through autumn?
They will go through the forward plan, and therefore they will be capable of scrutiny by the appropriate
So that's our
commission.
scrutiny route.
So therefore,
Okay.
that would, if it's a key decision, that would still be the case, and we've had that assurance.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not as bad as it sounds, but what we also talked about is we do need more, as Joe's emphasised, we need more positive engagement because members are wanting to be included in the process. Right. Oh, Gary, last question.
There might or might not be anything useful coming out of these discussion shops. What are they costing, and where is that information available? What's the cost of running these operations?
So they are being run, obviously Health and Wellbeing, Learning City Partnership and Homes are already currently run by the council, and they are not changing in their functions or terms of reference. They're continuing as they have continued with the council for, I think, at least 3, 4, 5 years that they've been in existence. Bristol Clean Capital Partnership is leading on supporting and clerking the the Environment Board, and Business West is supporting and clerking the Economy Board, and First Bus, they clerk and support the Transport Board. Yeah, and there is no payment to any members of these boards.
I mean, we already know the First Bus have got somebody in the Mayor's office, so they're actually financing this Transport Board.
Gary, you can't have it both ways. When you complain about the costs and then complain when we're not incurring the costs. So now,
I was inquiring about the cost, Jeff. I wanted it open.
Right. I think we've exhausted questions on that. Ed, you've got off very lightly. But thank you for your time. Thank you, Andrea. And we move on to item 10, Corporate Performance Report. Mark, it's probably not the best time of day to be starting to talk about corporate performance reports, but you would say every time of day is a good time to. So members have obviously seen the papers. Do you want to give us a brief introduction?
Yep, sure thing. Okay, so I've got 2 items on the main page. First of all, to briefly go through the Q4 performance report itself, but also to then quickly show you the outcome of some conversations that we had last year around the business plan and the performance framework, to show you that that's complete and the targets are now available. So we can do both of those items now. So if we flick through to, there's a 1-page summary of performance. I'll tell you when to stop. Yep. So if you make that a bit smaller. So that is the performance summary, where some of the highlights that I've selected from the 88 indicators that are in the overall set. There's obviously a lot more detail in the subsequent pages, which what's gone up, what's gone down, and some of the management comments. So that's where the detail members can look at. I've highlighted some items. Briefly, you'll see that we've set some challenging targets, and overall we met just under half of the targets during the year. But when we look at the number of indicators that have improved compared to 12 months ago, that's actually 62%. So if I briefly talk about some of the indicators that are in that set, admissions to care homes has got better, and actually subsequent to the publication of this report, we've completed the annual statutory return, and so some data quality checking happened, so that's actually gone green, so that's a good result. We did actually meet the target on that. We also met the target on home adaptations, and the assistive technology, so some of those things that help people live independently have worked. Rough sleeping and the temporary accommodation, that's still a challenge, so we haven't met the targets there, but the appropriate Scrutiny Commission is looking at more detail there. Great news on care leavers in employment. We've actually got the highest number on the statutory KPI since 2015, so really, really good performance for those young people. And actually we see that young people's employment is generally is looking positive, so that's one of the things I wanted to highlight. Also apprenticeships in Bristol City Council, both in terms of overall numbers and in the proportion from priority groups. We've met the target on affordable homes this year. We have also cut the number of delayed transfers of care from hospital, so that's good. Not so good is the mental health progress as evidenced by the Quality of Life survey, and quite a few of those indicators from the Quality of Life show not the progress that we would have liked. And members should be aware that where we've reported that, it's actually something that the Local Government Association have been finding across the country, where we're asking residents and citizens about their interaction with government and officialdom, if I put it like that. There's a general kind of sense of disappointment, if you like, on the part of the public. The other thing I'd mention on that, and it's in my longer report, is things like recycling also didn't quite hit the target where we would want to. I don't know how much time you want me to carry on, Chair, but a couple more highlights would just be traffic congestion is increasingly a concern, but I think you've talked about that a lot already today. So having said that, bus journeys has increased again this year, so the infrastructure work is paying off in that sense. And I think most of our organisational priorities have improved. FOI, we're still not quite meeting the target, but we are collecting the right amount of tax. And I would say that the experience overall of people with council services is highly correlated to deprivation. So our most deprived communities do have the worst kind of interaction with the council, if you like. So broadly speaking, those are my main highlights, so I can take questions on that if appropriate, or we can move on to the next publication of the targets for next year, but that perhaps now's the right time to stop.
Very brief questions, please. Celia? Claire?
I'm a bit intrigued by the ones in workplace organisational priorities, where we've obviously got a pretty poor sickness record. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Have I read that correct? It seems to me that some people are saying that they really like the council, but a large number of people are off sick. Have I read that correctly?
I guess the people that filled in the survey for their experience of working for the council did have quite a lot of positive indicators, yeah. But it's also true that the indicator that you've picked up on, sickness, is above target. What I would say about that is that it has been getting worse for a long time, and we've now turned that curve. So we are.
So it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, that's right. So it's now getting better, but it's not as low as we would like it to be.
Yeah, because those two, that's a sort of odd correlation, isn't it?
Claire?
Yeah, it's the number of invoices paid on time, which we still seem to be struggling with. We sort of marginally, I think, got a bit better and then got a bit worse. Is that right? Or I've just lost my page, so, but I am quite worried that we're not making a lot of progress on this. I know, Mike, you gave us a bit of an update on it last time, but I'm still quite worried that, I mean, this is people's livelihoods when we don't pay their bills. And, you know, if you're a small business, you're looking at cash flow. It's reputational risk of who'd want to do business with Bristol City Council if you don't pay on time. Can you let me have some confidence that it is going to improve?
So what I can say is that there has been and continues to be quite a lot of work on this. So Chris Holmes, most of you will know, did quite a lot of intensive work on this, and it has been looked at in more detail by the Resources Scrutiny Commission. I think we just hold up a hand and say we've still got quite a long way to go on this. Some of it is about, you know, handoffs within the council that we know we need to get better at. As I say, I was going to say if it's a subject of particular interest, we could bring back a fuller report, but actually the Resources Commission have in the past looked at it. But I think we would say it isn't good enough, but we do continue to work hard at trying to tackle the issue.
Brenda and then Gary.
It's not a question, Chair. It's just a quick comment on the numbers of care leavers and the huge improvement in having them in education. And also, I think we've got at least a couple that are now apprentices with the council too. So I just thought it was worth commenting on that to say how much that's improved, and very pleased about that.
Gary.
I don't think there's much point in us going on about some of the things we like and don't like, but what I would like to say is that over the few years I've been seeing this is a massive improvement in terms of presentation and clarity. So thank you for that. It's a significant improvement. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that, Gary, because I mean it's actually something you can read and interpret now, and that's a really positive. So yeah, thank you for raising that. So Mark, if you'd like to take us through the second part.
I just noticed that it says that there's no data ready yet for the number of new homes, and I have something in the back of my mind about when it would be available. I know it comes in tranches or something.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that much longer, but they do a survey that is a much more complete, because obviously this has to encompass a lot of private sector delivery. So I'd have to check that one out for you about exactly when we expect it, but there's a bit of a lag time on inquiries with all the different developers.
Right, so targets for 1920.
Okay, so this document's meant to, and it is actually published on our website. So it's alongside the page with the corporate strategy on, and our business plan, and our summation of the achievements of last year's business plan. And this report is one where you'll recall your workshop around which indicators might best describe, you know, to the citizen the things that they would feel about the council doing things and, you know, providing better services and having projects that influence their lives. So this is now a really clear set of indicators that's really meant to focus on the business plan and the corporate strategy items. And if we just go down just a couple of pages in, you'll see we've got a preamble, but we've also got very clearly last year's performance indicator number, and we've got the target that we're setting next year. So your involvement in helping us to choose the indicators was followed by assessing what the full score was for the last financial year, and then working with the services to set a smart target, one that was actually achievable and one that obviously took us in the direction that we wanted to go for each of those particular items in the business plan itself. So we'll also aim to give the public a quarterly update, so that instead of the report that I've just presented with lots of narrative and lots of detail and hundreds of boxes on it, we wanted to do something along these lines, which was really, really simple and something for the public to just at a glance see. So it won't have that many pages. I think this is about a dozen pages or so, 20 pages. Yeah, a dozen pages. So that's going to be the format that we want to inform the public about performance of the council in future.
Any questions? Gary?
Just slightly puzzled because we've got a target for 2019-20 of 440 for affordable homes, and this doesn't seem to match with figures quoted elsewhere.
So the target for affordable homes, which page is that on? Sorry. Which one's that? Fair and inclusive. Okay, so yes, the 440. So that's based on what actual schemes are underway that we expect to deliver. Behind this is also a set of plans, because obviously this takes us up to next March. So by the end of the year, there's also the 800 affordable target, which is what they're making plans to achieve in the rest of the year 2020. So there was an explicit kind of examination of that point, Councillor.
Paula?
Thank you very much. I remember doing this workshop. It was really good fun and I enjoyed it, and I think it's really interesting. Reading some of the information, you know, because of some of the discussions that we've been having, I understand the contextual information behind it. Say, for example, one of the, on the education bit, you know, the target for having educational plans ready on time jumps from 24 to 62%. And although that might look dodgy on the outside, I know that because of Anna Keane's work and that, so I understand that. But then also I looked at your earlier indicators in the previous thing, and we talked about the number of pupils from deprived areas achieving at a GCSE with the attainment 8, and the target for that has reduced. And I'm just a bit, you know, I just wonder, the assumption I'm coming to is that kids just aren't achieving, so we'll drop the target. Would that be fair or completely unfair? Is that too complicated a question?
It's not complicated if I know which indicator you're talking about.
Well, I was just looking in the education one. It's gone from 16 points down to 15. Key commitments.
Ah, right. Okay. So that's a measure of the gap. Yeah. So we want a smaller gap. This is the gap between the Bristol average and those that are disadvantaged. So we're trying to make it smaller.
So that's actually positive. I read that wrong. Thank you very much.
Claire, did you have a question?
I I just didn't think some of these targets were ambitious enough. Increase the percentage of pupils achieving the expected standard in reading, writing and maths. We only want to make a 1% improvement. Seems a bit sad. But also, I thought it was a bit sad to see that we were only expecting to reduce the number of households who were in temporary accommodation for more than 6 months. We only want to improve that by 5 households. And it just struck me as a target that you will probably manage quite easily without much effort. And whether that's ambitious enough and why you set them so low.
Okay, so there's always a tension, isn't there, between kind of getting better and better forever. But in conversation with the service, there are often things, and the context of that environment around housing has got more and more difficult over time. So one might also argue that standing still is an achievement. But in the conversation about the ones around housing, they have taken that sort of wider view, and that's the sort of tension that they've struggled with. But also the sense of achievable and realistic targets is one that you do want to hold on to. So that's the balance that we've got on that one.
Can I just late in the day just remind members that Mark isn't actually responsible for achieving every one of these targets. He's reporting the information, so bear that in mind. But actually, I'll come to you in a mojo, because I had on a similar vein to Claire's in terms of targets, and I think possibly I've spent too long in this chamber and in other places hearing about climate emergencies and debating them, and I looked at theme 3, key commitment 1, target 2. Increase the number of single journeys on Park and Ride into Bristol. We're increasing it by 3,816 on a figure of 1.7 million. And I don't expect an answer now, but I think members would be interested in a response from those who set that target as to why we aren't looking at actually significantly improving that figure. There is no way that can be a stretch target. So could that perhaps be relayed back and we have a response on that one?
Yes, I'll happily relay that back. But the general thing about the buses was the switch between all of the different types of bus and the metro bus and all of those things. So that was what they were discussing around that whole suite. But I'll get a specific answer to that.
In which case it would actually be helpful for members to see the calculation of what the increase is on the remaining Park and Ride services, because otherwise it's lost within the translation. But thank you. Joe.
The same but not the same, same but different is another one where the aim is to increase the number of visitors to museums, but the actual target is lower than the previous year's outturn. So whilst again, as Jeff has said, you don't necessarily know the answers to all of these things, but a little bit of explanation somewhere would be handy, because it might be that it was just a one-off event that made that previous year so successful. But
Chair, where people guess what that one-off event was.
A little bit.
Wallace and Gromit.
Yeah.
So if you look at the trend analysis of when that happens, this simply reflects what's happened in the year following that previously. So it would be completely unreasonable to have a target that didn't reflect the fact that it was hugely boosted by Wallace and Gromit. But
that again is the same thing, isn't it, as the Park and Ride? There needs to be, we need to kind of know why the target is low, and people won't necessarily always know. So even if you had a little number in brackets which took out the thing that made it different, so that you had a figure that you could genuinely compare it to, that might be helpful.
I think it's an interesting comment, and one perhaps smart, because as Gary said, the presentation of this is fantastic, but actually, those little explanations, maybe as footnotes or whatever, can be really helpful to members, because it actually means then we've got part of the story, and we can be sharing that with others. So I think that would be positive if that could be borne in mind as this evolves. I'm going to bring this to a conclusion. Mark, thank you for your time, and again, thank you for the presentation and the way it's presented to us. So thank you for that. Item 11 on the agenda is the Corporate Risk Management Report and Annual Updates. I think, Mike, it's up to you to decide whether you want to spend very long on this.
I hadn't intended to spend any time on it other than deal with any questions if there are any.
Are there any questions? No? Right, an excellent presentation, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Item 12 is the Temple Island update on proposals and disposal arrangements. Now, members will know that this is now a subject of a call-in. The reason why I put this on the agenda was actually a matter of concern that was raised with me by at least 3 members of OSM. And that was the fact that at Cabinet on the 2nd July, questions were asked about the ability to scrutinise the information, and a question was asked, so you are saying that Scrutiny had received the legal advice relating to the plans regarding Temple Island, and the Deputy Mayor responded, absolutely. Now, that caused concern to all the Scrutiny leads and a number of other people, because not only had we not seen it, but we'd not had the opportunity to see it. And I therefore wanted to take this meeting as a chance to put on record our concern, and really to say, Mike, that I think Scrutiny would appreciate if that could be remedied at the next Cabinet meeting, because clearly the implication that we've seen something that we hadn't is unfortunate, to say the least.
Yeah, Chairman, I wasn't at Cabinet, as you know, and I haven't had a chance to speak directly to Councillor Cheney, but my understanding is that it was a comment made in error, and obviously I can take the concern back to Councillor Cheney and suspect that he'll be willing to acknowledge that error at the next Cabinet meeting. That's my understanding, anyway.
Well, I wasn't at the Cabinet meeting either, and I'm very happy to accept that explanation, but I think it would be appreciated if that could be put on record at the next Cabinet meeting, that was said in error. And then we know
all I can do is take the request away to Cabinet Cheney. Councillor Cheney, what I'm giving you is my understanding of the situation.
Right, thank you, mate. Gary.
Absolutely, it needs to be on record at the next Cabinet, but also could I suggest that the statement from Councillor Cheney to the call-in committee to that effect would be quite appropriate as well, because the call-in committee are looking at whether process was properly followed, and clearly that's an important consideration there.
Noted. And perhaps, Mike, if I will try and relay that to Craig, but if you could as well, that would be helpful. Right, item 14 is the work programme. The first item I want to mention in terms of the work programme is in respect of the meeting relating to the wholly owned companies. At the Leeds meeting, we talked about when this could happen, and we were trying to look for a date in September. It is proving impossible to find a date in September when the officers of the council, the officers of the companies, and myself can be available. and it seems somewhat impractical for me not to be available, given that I'm the observer on the shareholder advisory group. So the preference is that this meeting should happen sooner rather than later, because it is hoped that in October and November there will be the opportunity for a further report from the companies on progress for the year and the business plan. So that being the case, the suggestion is that we consider reverting to the 14th of August for a meeting on the companies. Now, this has only just evolved today, which is why I'm doing this now rather than by email. But can I ask members who are here whether the 14th of August is workable and how many it's not workable for? Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm actually looking at the Wednesday, the 2nd of October, and I've looked at the agenda, and taking the amount of time Brexit Preparedness report took this evening, we could take that one out. It looks a very light agenda. Is that an opportunity to put a more stronger subject? You've got performance report Q1.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that one. Bristol is open. I have no idea what that is. But one city plan, the progress update. That's the entire thing for Wednesday, the 2nd of October.
Very valid point. What we're being persuaded by council officers is that they're very keen that this report should happen sooner than the beginning of October.
I have no problems with the August date.
But I understand, Lucy. You've had conversations with.
Yeah, I think there's a desire to have a bit of distance between bringing the performance and also the annual business report. So we have looked at all of these options and had lots of conversations about them. And I do think the 14th of August is the least worst option, as they say. I think October probably is too late. That's the advice that we're being given. So.
I mean, I fully understand that, and I have no problems. But normally, August is a year when we don't normally meet too often because a lot of people.
I agree.
Are on holiday.
The only thing I'm saying is on recent experience, empty agendas don't remain empty for very long, and suddenly we find we're here until late at night again. So. See what others say. Brenda.
Do we know what time of day on the 14th you were looking at, Chair?
We were looking at 5 o'clock, but there wouldn't be a mayoral question time, so it would be.
In that case, I couldn't make it.
Right.
I'm not here.
Right. Could you make it earlier in the day, or just not? Sorry. Yeah. Right, you're away, and you're away. Right. So we either have the option of looking at sometime during the day. I think I'd be, and if we know that and I think Anthony was unable to make it as well, I would be reluctant to fix it at a time when we know 3 members can't make it. The only issue we have difficulty with is if the council officers and company officers can't make that date, and I have a feeling they can't, which is why we haven't pursued it, we are then struggling. So I suggest that Lucy checks whether the 2nd of October is possible. If it's not, then I think we'll have to go with the 14th of August. We'll try and do it in the day so that Brenda can make it, if that can work for others. And we'll have to ask for substitutes. Otherwise, I think we have a danger that this is going to go on later and later, which I think would be inappropriate.
I'll bring it forward as early as I
can. Yeah. Oh. There will be papers prior. There'll be, part of it will be managed access, but they will be available, and substitutes will obviously have the managed access to come to them as well. Okay. We have in the work programme 3 inquiry days. We were going to ask members to speak briefly on what was coming up, but I think in fact we will just summarise. So Paula is organising with her commission an inquiry day onto climate adaptation.
I think apart from I had some feedback the last time we had a meeting, which was maybe about a month ago. We had some feedback from the officers who, said everything's in place. But apart from that, I've come out. I don't have my iPad in front of me, I'm afraid, so I'm a little bit at a disadvantage.
If you can, on your climate adaptation, put something about this chamber on a hot summer's evening, that would be really appreciated.
It really exemplifies the whole point about why I put it, what I was felt so strongly about it, because No,
I mean it just highlights the need. Claire is leading on the special educational needs inquiry day, and Steve Clark is leading on the High Streets inquiry day. So those are the 3 additional items of work to our main scrutiny process that are covered in the work programme. I suggest at this time of night we don't go into any more detail, but obviously more information from myself or Lucy. Jeff?
Sorry, Jeff, can I just take us back one step about this proposed meeting that we were talking about? I'm looking at the agenda for December, and we have on the agenda the housing company business plan, the energy company business plan, and the Bristol Waste business plan. Is that not going to be a duplication?
No, that's the business plan for the next financial year, whereas what we're having the report now is the historic position of where the companies were at the end of March. So, if you like, this is the first part of the information stage where we understand where they've got to, and then we look at where they're moving to for next financial year. So they are separate, and that's why they want some time between the 2 being discussed. Nothing else on the work programme? No, Chair. You've got a paper on budget scrutiny process, and this is just for confirmation. It's been discussed with Denise, it's been discussed with Steve as Chair of Resources, and with Clive as Chair of the Task and Finish Group. So I hope we all just agree that, move on to the next item. Health Subcommittee Terms of Reference. This is trying to bring us up to carrying out the health scrutiny process properly. Brenda, Celia and Claire have all been involved in moving this forward. I believe the 3 of you are happy with the terms of reference. Yep, good. So if you all are, the rest of us would not dare to contradict. So therefore we note those and look forward to that. Yeah, Celia? Yeah.
Sorry, I might be thinking out loud, but there isn't a specified number of times we're going to meet.
No, we were discussing that earlier and concluded that to put in a prescriptive number of times could be counterproductive, because it may either be that you follow some lines of work and find that you need to have more meetings, or you decide to approach in a different way, and we felt that for this first year we are better to leave that to the discretion of the Commission as to what you feel you need to deliver what you need to do within the resources that Scrutiny has available. Otherwise, you could end up having meetings for the sake of it, which is would be bad news. I don't think that would happen. Or you end up finding you can't have as many meetings as you need because it's been specified. Brenda.
I think by the very nature of this committee, a lot of it is quite reactive and we don't necessarily know something is coming along. We've got an issue at the moment that has cropped up quite recently that we do need to look into. So I think it is quite useful to not set exactly precise numbers of meetings for the reasons you've outlined.
So that was our feeling, but what we would ask is that your work programme is reported into the Leeds meeting, and that way we provide the check and balance, because there's otherwise the pressure that you could end up meeting 10 times between now and March if you're not careful. So we can hopefully make that work. Okay, minutes of WECA overview and scrutiny are there for information. The Mayor's forward plan is there for information. And whilst none of you can see this, I had optimistically written down on my agenda 8:30. So whilst we may not have, we've gone off course a little bit as we've got there, we are coming to our conclusion. Can I just remind you, in terms of the Clean Air Plan update, that first of all, there is a role for all members in promoting that consultation, and there is also the fact that members can respond to the consultation and respond with their thoughts and issues. Gary was making the point of why he thought that was difficult. I can only tell you that the message that we've given our residents in all the surveys that they've responded to in the last few years is find a white box and put in what you think, even if it doesn't ask you, because actually that is a way of getting the information into the council. So can we all try and make sure that both we do it ourselves and encourage our residents to? Mike, anything you want to add? Right, in that case, Mike, thank you for staying with us for the duration. Thank you all for your time. I declare the meeting closed.